Hey, old man, what was your call sign again? The Admiral's voice thundered across the Navy reunion hall like a command meant to test a soldier's pride. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it was careless, the kind of laughter men use to fill silence they don't understand. Glasses clinked, metals glimmered, and old war stories were being traded like playing cards among men who had once stared death in the face. But in one corner, sitting quietly beside his teenage son, was a man who didn't laugh. Marcus Hill. Broad-shouldered, his posture still disciplined even after years of retirement. Marcus looked like a man built from iron and silence. His face held that kind of calm that comes from surviving things you can't talk about. He'd served the country for more than a decade. Missions buried under red tape and classified files. The kind of stories only whispered in shadows. He was a single father now. The kind of man who cooked breakfast for his boy before school, who mowed his own lawn, who didn't need anyone's attention or applause. But tonight, fate wasn't about to let him stay invisible. The Admiral smirked, holding his drink, unaware of the weight he was about to awaken. He leaned back and repeated, "Come on, Hill. What do they call you out there? Must have had something tough or funny." More laughter rolled through the room, bouncing off the walls filled with flags and framed photos of fallen brothers. Marcus finally lifted his eyes, slow and deliberate. His son, Jaden, glanced up too, sensing the change in the air. Marcus's voice came low, heavy, not loud, but enough to slice through the noise like a blade. "My call sign," he said. Then after a pause that felt eternal, he added, "They call me Iron Ghost." The laughter died instantly. The sound was gone, replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed against every chest in the room. The Admiral froze, his grin vanishing as the name hit him like a punch. Iron Ghost. He had heard it before, years ago, during whispered briefings, in reports half erased by military censorship. The name belonged to a phantom, a SEAL who operated where others couldn't, a man who got in and out of hell itself, and left nothing but ashes behind. He wasn't supposed to be real. But now, that myth was sitting in front of him, breathing, human, and staring straight through him. The Admiral's glass trembled slightly in his hand. Your Iron Ghost?" he stammered, voice breaking the tense air. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyes carried the weight of truth, the kind that didn't need medals or proof. Around them, other veterans began to shift uncomfortably. Some had heard the stories, too, of a mission that went sideways in the dead of night, a team ambushed deep behind enemy lines. The radio had gone silent for hours. Command had written them off as lost, until a single voice broke through the static. Iron Ghost reporting mission complete. That voice was followed by coordinates. When rescue teams arrived, they found every enemy neutralized, weapons destroyed, communications cut, and only one SEAL still standing, bleeding, limping but alive. The others had been taken out before backup even arrived. That man vanished from records afterward. Officially, the mission did not exist. The Whisperers said he walked away from it all, too haunted, too tired of ghosts that never left him. Now, the legend sat in flesh and blood before them, looking like any other father, dressed in a plain shirt, his son by his side. Jaden looked at his dad in disbelief. You were Iron Ghost." The boy's voice cracked, a mix of shock and pride. Marcus turned to him with a faint, broken smile. "That was a long time ago, son." The Admiral tried to gather himself. "Marcus!" I didn't mean," but Marcus cut him off quietly. "I know, sir. You were just joking." His tone wasn't angry. It was colder than anger, the kind that made even decorated officers drop their gaze. Jaden couldn't stop staring at him. He thought about the nights his father would sit outside, staring at the horizon in silence. The nights he'd wake up shouting from dreams he never talked about. The mornings he'd remind Jaden, "Be strong, but never cruel." Suddenly, it all made sense. His father wasn't just a veteran. He was a man who had seen too much, carried too many names that the world would never remember. The Admiral cleared his throat, trying to find words that didn't sound hollow. "They say Iron Ghost was unkillable. You just kept coming, even when—" Marcus interrupted, his eyes distant. "Unkillable." He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, sir. I wasn't unkillable. I just had no choice." His voice grew harder, darker. "When your team's gone, and the only way out is through fire, you stop feeling fear. You stop feeling anything. You just move." He clenched his fist once, then relaxed it. "That's what Iron Ghost really meant. The iron, that's the weight of what I carried back. The ghost, those are the men who didn't." No one dared speak after that. The Admiral looked down at his drink, ashamed of his joke. Around the hall, old soldiers nodded quietly, not out of pity but out of respect. They understood. Every one of them carried ghosts. Jaden reached over and placed a hand on his father's arm. Marcus looked at him, eyes softening. "You don't have to be proud of what I did, son," he said. "Just be proud I came home." That single sentence broke something inside everyone listening. The Admiral straightened, saluted Marcus without a word, and every other man in the room slowly followed. The laughter was gone. All that remained was the sound of boots shifting on the floor and the heavy truth hanging in the air. That night, as the reunion ended, Marcus and Jaden walked out into the cold night. The stars were faint above the dark sea, and the wind carried a chill that cut through the silence. Jaden finally whispered, "Dad, do you miss them?" Marcus looked up at the sky. "Every single day." He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's why I live like this. Because they can't." Behind them, the Admiral stood at the door, watching them leave. The man he had once joked with, now a reminder of everything true soldiers are made of: pain, duty, sacrifice, and silence. The Admiral's eyes glistened as he murmured to himself, "Iron Ghost now, I understand." Before that night, the Admiral had only heard pieces of the story, fragments that drifted through the ranks like whispers around a dying campfire. Soldiers spoke of it when the nights got long, when the memories grew heavy, when the air smelled of gun oil and regret. Iron Ghost wasn't just another SEAL nickname. It was a name spoken with a kind of reverence and fear. It belonged to a man who was said to have done the impossible, a man who fought like a shadow and disappeared like smoke. To the young recruits, it was a legend. To the veterans who'd seen war up close, it was a wound they didn't want to reopen. The legend began in the blacked-out corridors of a classified operation, a mission that never made it to the papers, never got a medal, never saw the light of day. A SEAL team had been sent deep behind enemy lines, somewhere in a place so hostile it wasn't even on the map. They were supposed to extract a captured informant, a man whose intel could save thousands of American lives. Everything went according to plan until it didn't. The ambush came in the middle of the night, swift, ruthless, and orchestrated with precision. It wasn't a firefight, it was a slaughter. The jungle erupted with gunfire, and the night was ripped apart by screams, explosions, and chaos. Command lost contact. For hours, all they could hear were bursts of static and fading voices over the comms. "We're surrounded," one soldier gasped before the line went dead. Back at the base, the operators stared at the screens in horror, helpless, knowing a whole team was vanishing off the grid. Reinforcements were hours away, too far to make any difference. It was supposed to be a total loss. But then, something strange happened. The enemy's communications went dark. Every channel, silent. Their equipment stopped working. Surveillance drones captured brief flashes. Men running, smoke spreading, figures dropping one by one. No pattern, no explanation. It was as if death itself had walked through their camp, unseen, unstoppable. When the backup team finally arrived, the scene they found made their blood run cold. Dozens of enemy fighters lay scattered, every weapon useless, their radios smashed, their vehicles disabled. And in the middle of that battlefield, in the flickering light of fires still burning, stood one man. Alone. His armor was dented, the paint scorched black. His hands were trembling, covered in blood that wasn't all his own. His face was streaked with ash, his eyes hollow but burning. He didn't speak right away. He didn't salute or explain. He just looked at the stunned soldiers who had come to recover bodies and said in a voice that cut through the smoke, "Iron Ghost reporting mission complete." Then his radio went dead, his signal vanished, and by the time they reached him, he was gone. No one saw where he went. No one saw how he'd survived. There are no footprints, no trail, no signs of life. Only the devastation he left behind. Command reviewed the footage 100 times. No one could explain it. One man had somehow outmaneuvered an entire battalion, destroyed their systems, and walked away alive. The file was stamped classified, buried in archives under layers of silence. But soldiers talk. They always do. The story of Iron Ghost spread like wildfire. Some said he was a phantom, a spirit sent by the fallen to avenge them. Others claimed he was a man who'd made a deal with death, that he'd already died once, and death didn't want him back. A few swore they'd fought beside him once, that he was real, flesh and blood, but that something inside him had changed after that night, that he'd stopped being human in the ways that mattered. As the years passed, Iron Ghost became a warning and an inspiration. New recruits whispered his name before dangerous missions, half in fear, half in respect. Command used his legend to motivate SEALs. Be like the Ghost. Unseen, unbreakable, unstoppable. But no one ever knew who he was. No photo, no official record, no grave. Just a name that haunted every man who ever heard it. Even the Admiral, who had climbed the ranks through blood and grit, remembered those rumors. He remembered the briefings that ended with commanders shaking their heads and muttering, "If Iron Ghost is still out there, I hope to God he's on our side." He remembered how other officers would lower their voices when a name came up, like it was sacred or cursed. But it was always a story, something unreal, until that night. Now, sitting in that reunion hall, staring at the quiet man who had just said the words, "They call me Iron Ghost," the Admiral felt a chill crawl down his spine. It wasn't just disbelief, it was recognition. He remembered reading the after-action report from that mission. He remembered the photos of the bodies, the burned-out vehicles, the coded lines that said "Operator Unknown." He remembered the audio recording that ended with those exact words. Iron Ghost reporting mission complete. His chest tightened. This man, Marcus Hill, wasn't supposed to exist. He wasn't supposed to be alive, much less sitting in front of him in civilian clothes, with his son by his side, like any other veteran trying to move on. The Admiral couldn't process it. The legend had flesh. The Ghost had a heartbeat. He wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but every word felt small, stupid. What do you say to a man like that? A man who had walked through hell and never bragged, never told a soul who he really was? The Admiral realized something then. Iron Ghost wasn't a name born from power or glory. It was born from pain, from loss, from the kind of strength that doesn't roar but endures. The air in the hall grew heavy, almost suffocating. Every soldier there felt it. That shift, that realization that the myth they'd spoken about for years wasn't a story anymore. He was sitting there, silent, breathing, trying to forget the very past they all glorified. And in that moment, the Admiral's throat went dry. His heart pounded with guilt, awe, and something close to fear. He had laughed at a legend. He had mocked a man who carried the kind of ghost that could crush a soul. And now, staring into Marcus Hill's steady, unflinching eyes, the Admiral knew with absolute certainty. Iron Ghost wasn't just a name. It was a scar that never healed. Marcus's son, Jaden, sat beside him, frozen in disbelief. His heart pounded as the words echoed in his head like a drumbeat he couldn't silence. "Dad, you were Iron Ghost?" he whispered, barely finding his voice. The room around him felt distant, the air heavy, every breath sharp. His father turned his head, his face calm, unreadable. Marcus gave a faint, almost tired smile. "That was a long time ago, son." His tone carried no pride, no thrill, just a kind of weariness that came from remembering too much. Jaden had grown up surrounded by stories of heroes. He'd watched documentaries about brave soldiers, read books about war and sacrifice. In school, he'd drawn pictures of men in uniform and labeled them heroes. But never once did he imagine that the quiet man who packed his lunch, fixed the squeaky gate, and reminded him to treat people with respect had once been one of those heroes. He thought his dad's silence about the military was modesty, not trauma. But now, sitting there, watching the color drain from the Admiral's face and the room's laughter die into shameful quiet, Jaden understood. Every scar on his father's skin, every sleepless night, Every time Marcus had sat outside staring into the dark, it all made sense now. Those weren't moments of peace. They were battles he was still fighting alone. Jaden remembered the times he'd heard his father whisper names in his sleep, names he didn't recognize. He remembered asking about the jagged scar across his shoulder once, and Marcus simply said, "Just a reminder." A reminder of what? Jaden never knew. Now he did. The Admiral finally found his voice, though it shook like a man standing in front of something sacred. "Iron Ghost, I thought you were a myth," he said softly, almost to himself. Marcus chuckled, but the sound was rough, hollow. Guess myths get old too. It was meant to be a joke, but it hit like a confession. There was no amusement in it, just the bitterness of someone who'd spent years trying to bury the ghost that refused to die. Behind that small grin, behind the tired eyes, was pain. The kind of pain that no medal, no ceremony, no patriotic speech could ever erase. It was the pain of a man who'd watched brothers die, who'd seen light fade from eyes he couldn't save, who'd carried the weight of doing what had to be done, even when it tore him apart inside. Those missions hadn't made him a legend to himself. They'd made him a prisoner of memory. Jaden looked at his father differently now. The respect was still there, but now it was mixed with sorrow. This man sitting next to him, the man who told him bedtime stories, who taught him to throw a football, who said, "I'm fine," whenever he clearly wasn't, had walked through hell and come back pretending everything was normal. And he'd done it to protect his son. Marcus had built his silence like armor, not because he was ashamed, but because he didn't want Jaden to inherit his nightmares. The Admiral took a step forward, almost hesitant, like he was approaching something fragile. "You know," he said quietly, "they used to say Iron Ghost could move through chaos like smoke. That bullets couldn't touch him, that he never failed a mission." His voice trembled with awe and guilt. And here you are, sitting like none of it ever happened. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw tightening. "That's the thing about myths," he said, voice low and edged with anger. "They only tell the part that sounds good. They never talk about what it cost." The Admiral flinched, as if struck. Marcus continued, his tone still even but heavier with every word. "They talk about the victories, the kills, the heroics, but they never talk about the faces you remember, the friends you couldn't save, the screams you still hear when everything's quiet. They don't tell you how every medal starts to feel like a gravestone." His voice cracked for a split second, but he swallowed it down. "They call me Iron Ghost because I kept surviving. But survival isn't glory. It's guilt that doesn't leave." The silence that followed was unbearable. Every man in the room could feel it, the truth, raw and ugly. These weren't the words of a decorated soldier. They were the confessions of a haunted one. Jaden felt tears sting his eyes, but he held them back, too afraid to show weakness in front of the father who'd already carried too much. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands together slowly. "I promised myself I'd never bring that world into this one," he said. "I didn't want my son growing up thinking war made men heroes. It doesn't. It just makes them older, faster." His gaze fell on Jaden, and for a moment, all the hardness in his expression melted into something heartbreakingly human. "You're the only thing I ever did right, Jay. Everything else, it's just survival." Jaden could barely speak. "But Dad, they looked up to you. You saved people. You." Marcus shook his head sharply. "I didn't save enough." The words hit like a hammer. "You think bringing a few men home makes up for the ones who never made it? You think being alive means you won?" His voice broke on the last word. "You don't win in war, son. You just stop dying." The Admiral lowered his eyes, guilt etched deep across his face. He'd come to this reunion expecting stories, laughs, maybe a few old memories. Instead, he'd been forced to look straight into the mirror of everything war really was. And the reflection wasn't noble or glorious. It was broken, bleeding, human. Marcus finally stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "It was a long time ago," he said again, quieter now, his anger cooling into exhaustion. "I buried Iron Ghost years ago. I just came here tonight to see some old faces. Didn't expect to dig up a grave." No one dared stop him as he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Jaden rose beside him, his heart heavy with pride and pain. They walked out of the hall together, leaving the stunned silence of uniformed men behind. The Admiral stood still, watching them go, his throat tight. For the rest of his life, he would remember that moment. Not the legend of Iron Ghost, not the myth whispered in the ranks, but the man, the father, the soldier who had carried his ghost with unshakable strength and said nothing. The myth had flesh. The ghost had a soul, and his silence said more than 1,000 war stories ever could. As the night deepened and the laughter in the hall turned into soft murmurs of nostalgia, the Admiral found himself watching Marcus from a distance. The man sat quietly at a table near the back, his son beside him, his posture still strong, but his face carved with years of silence. The Admiral couldn't shake the weight pressing against his chest. Guilt, regret, curiosity. That single word, Iron Ghost, had cracked something open in him. He had made a joke, and in return, he had come face to face with a living wound wrapped in calm composure. He waited until most of the crowd had thinned out before walking over. His voice, usually confident, now carried a trembling hesitation. "Marcus, forgive me," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to disrespect you earlier." Marcus lifted his eyes, steady but tired. "No harm done, sir. You couldn't have known." His voice was polite, almost detached, the tone a man used to burying more than just words. But the Admiral didn't stop there. Something in him needed to understand. Needed the truth that had haunted so many for years. "There's one thing I've always wondered," the Admiral said, leaning slightly closer, his voice low. "How did you earn that name? Iron Ghost." Marcus didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the floor, his hands clasped tightly, as if holding something invisible between them. When he finally spoke, his words came slow, heavy, and filled with the kind of pain that reshapes a man from the inside out. It wasn't about being unkillable or invisible or any of that nonsense, Marcus said. People love to make stories out of what they don't understand. But the truth? The truth's never glorious. It's ugly. It's bloody. It stays with you. The Admiral stayed silent, listening. Marcus's voice dropped lower, rougher. It was about what you carry when no one sees you. When the smoke clears, when the shouting stops, when the air smells like metal and death, and you're the only one left standing. His words hung there like a curse. The Admiral could see the shift in Marcus's eyes, that distant, haunted look of a man remembering something he wished he could forget. "On that mission," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly, "my team didn't make it out. I did. That's all anyone ever remembers. But they don't see what came after. They don't see what it feels like to drag bodies through mud, to hear your brothers begging you not to leave them. They don't hear the silence after the gunfire stops, the silence that screams louder than anything you've ever heard." The Admiral swallowed hard. Marcus continued, his tone harder now, fueled by anger and grief twisted together. "They gave me that name because I carried their tags back. Every one of them. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to mourn. I just kept going. I carried them until my body gave out. I carried their memories, their voices, their jokes, their last breaths. That's the iron I carry. The weight. The ghosts that never let me sleep. That's the other part of the name." He looked up at the Admiral then, his eyes raw and burning. "Iron Ghost. That's what they called me because I walked out of that hell alive. But they never understood I didn't come back whole. The part of me that laughed, that cared, that believed, that stayed there, buried with them." The Admiral's throat tightened. He tried to speak, but the words stuck like stones. "So you weren't a legend because you couldn't die," he finally whispered. Marcus shook his head slowly. "But because I kept them alive," he said, tapping his chest once hard. "In here." The sound of his hand hitting his heart echoed faintly in the empty hall. The Admiral blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in his eyes. There is something brutal about the simplicity of Marcus's confession. No heroics, no grand gestures, just the cold truth of what it meant to survive. "I used to think surviving was a gift," Marcus went on, quieter now. "But it's not. It's punishment. Every day you wake up, and for a second you forget. Then it all comes back, the smell of gunpowder, the screams, the blood. You see faces. You hear their laughter. And then you remember you're still here, and they're not. That's the kind of thing that eats you alive, sir. The Admiral's voice cracked when he finally spoke. Marcus, I read the reports. That mission was called a failure. They said the entire team was lost. Marcus gave a bitter smile. Yeah, because it's easier to write us off as dead than to admit we sent good men to die for nothing. They buried the truth under paperwork and medals. That's how the world works. But I didn't die with them. I came home, and that's something I've never stopped questioning. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the Admiral's. You ever look at your reflection and not recognize the man staring back? That's what survival feels like. Every scar on me, every nightmare, that's the price of that call sign. People like to whisper it like it's something to be proud of. It's not. It's a reminder that I outlived better men. The Admiral could barely breathe. His hands trembled as he placed his glass down on the table. You've carried this all alone, he said softly. Marcus nodded once. Because nobody wants to hear it. They want the legend, not the truth. They want the story of Iron Ghost, the man who couldn't die. Not Marcus Hill, the man who wishes he had. The Admiral's eyes welled, his voice breaking completely. You honored them, Marcus. You brought them home. Marcus exhaled, slow and sharp. No, I brought their tags home. Their bodies were gone. Their laughter, their futures, all gone. The only thing I can do now is live like they wanted to. Quietly, humbly. For them, not for me. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The hum of the air vents filled the silence. The Admiral's face was tight with sorrow and shame, while Marcus sat motionless, his stare fixed somewhere far away, maybe back on that battlefield, maybe on the ghost that followed him home. Finally, Marcus stood. You wanted to know how I earned the name? He said quietly. Now you do. The Admiral nodded slowly, unable to meet his gaze. I wish I hadn't asked, he whispered. Marcus gave a tired, empty smile. Yeah, he said, his voice low and broken. Me too. That night, long after the reunion ended, Marcus sat on the porch again. The cold air pressed against his skin, but he didn't move. Jaden came out quietly, holding his phone in his hand. The boy hesitated for a moment before speaking. Dad, he said softly, can I ask you something? Marcus glanced at him, his eyes tired but patient. Sure, son. What's on your mind? Jaden took a breath. At school, we're supposed to talk about real heroes. Not movie heroes or athletes, real ones. I want to tell them about you, about what you said tonight. Can I record you? Marcus froze. The request hit him harder than he expected. He'd spent years avoiding cameras, microphones, and anything that could drag his past back into the open. He didn't want to be anyone's story again. He just wanted to be a father, a man who could mow his lawn and drink his coffee without remembering blood and gunfire. You don't need to do that, Jaden, he said after a pause. People don't need to hear from me. Jaden shook his head. They do, Dad. They need to hear the truth. Not the movies. Not the speeches. What you said to the Admiral, it mattered. It made me understand what it really means to serve. Please, Dad, just a minute. For them. Marcus looked at his son. The same brown eyes, the same stubborn fire. He saw the sincerity there, the respect, the pride. And something inside him softened. He nodded slowly. All right, he said quietly. Just once. Jaden set up the phone and pressed record. Marcus stared into the small lens for a moment, unsure where to begin. Then he spoke. If you wear a uniform, he said, his voice low and steady, remember, it's not about being the strongest or the bravest. It's about standing for those who no longer can. It's about carrying the weight no one else wants to carry. That's what being a soldier means. He paused. His eyes shifted away from the camera, as if looking into memories he couldn't escape. I've seen what war takes from men. It strips away the noise, the medals, the ranks, the pride, until all that's left is your soul and whether or not you can live with it. If you ever wear that uniform, do it with humility, because one day that cloth will hang on a wall, and all that will matter is how you treated the people who stood beside you. He stopped there. Jaden ended the recording quietly. There was no grand speech, no rehearsed words. Just truth, raw and simple. The next morning, without much thought, Jaden posted the clip online. He added a short caption, "My dad's message about real heroes." Then he left for school. By the time he came home, the post had exploded. Hundreds of thousands of views. Then millions. Comments flooded in. Veterans, soldiers, families, even civilians who'd never been near a battlefield. "We serve with Iron Ghost," one comment read. "He saved lives." Another said, "I remember him. The man never left anyone behind." Others wrote things like, "This man deserves every honor there is, and this is the kind of hero America should remember." Marcus didn't even know until Jaden showed him that evening. He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening as the number of views climbed higher and higher. "You shouldn't have done that," he said softly, but there was no anger in his voice, just disbelief. "Dad, they needed to hear you," Jaden said. "They're not just watching, they're listening." News outlets started calling within days. Reporters, producers, magazines. Everyone wanted an interview with the man once known as Iron Ghost. They dug through old files, declassified reports, fragments of missions that had been lost to time. But Marcus didn't respond to any of them. He turned down every offer, every invitation. When a reporter came to his door, he told them simply, "I've said what needed to be said." Weeks passed. The video didn't fade, it grew. Schools used it in assemblies. Veterans groups shared it on anniversaries. It became something more than a clip. It became a message, a reminder that heroism wasn't about fame or victory. It was about sacrifice, integrity, and the quiet courage to keep living when the world had taken everything from you. One cold afternoon, a familiar car pulled up to Marcus's home. The Admiral stepped out, not in uniform this time, but in a plain coat. Marcus opened the door, surprised. The Admiral didn't speak right away. He carried something in his hands, a neatly folded American flag. When he finally looked up, his voice broke slightly. "I didn't come here as a superior," he said. "I came here as a man who forgot what honor truly means. You reminded me." He extended the flag toward Marcus. "Thank you for everything." Marcus stared at it, the symbol of everything he'd fought for, everything he'd lost. He took it quietly, his hands steady, his face unreadable. "You don't have to thank me," he said after a long silence. "Just remember them. That's all any of us ever wanted." The Admiral nodded. There were no more words left between them, just a mutual understanding that didn't need to be spoken. That night, after the Admiral left, Jaden saw his father standing outside again. But this time, he wasn't haunted. He was quiet, peaceful. He looked up at the stars, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Not the forced, guarded kind, but something real, something that came from deep within. Inside, the folded flag sat on the mantel beside a row of old dog tags, names of men who would never be forgotten. The legend of Iron Ghost had come full circle. It no longer lived in rumors whispered in barracks or stories told by veterans around fires. It lived in a lesson, one passed from a father to his son, and from that son to the world. And under that starlit sky, Marcus Hill finally felt something he hadn't felt since the war. Peace. Not pride, not glory, just peace. Because in the end, the world didn't remember him for how he fought, but for how he lived, quietly, humbly, and with the unshakable heart of a soldier who carried his ghost with grace and turned his pain into purpose.